In our new age of terrifying lethal gadgets, which supplanted so swiftly the old one, the first great aggressive war, if it should come, will be launched by suicidal little madmen pressing an electronic button. Such a war will not last long. There will be no conquerors and no conquests, only the charred bones of the dead on an uninhabited planet. William L. Shirer, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. The role-playing video game Fallout depicts a world mired in the horrific after-effects of a nuclear war. On Saturday, October 23, 2077, the United States and the People's Republic of China attacked each other with atomic bombs. The exchange lasted for 2 hours and killed billions of people. The war is depicted as the logical end to the greed and violence of both superpowers, and we never learn in the video games who dropped the bomb first, because it doesn't matter. The suicidal little madman who first pressed the button could be a Jiang Wei or a John Smith. To borrow a phrase from Martin Luther King Jr., the Great War is the inevitable result of an age of guided missiles and misguided men. This war was the end of the world, a mutual annihilation which scarred the earth forever and left the surface populated by scattered remnants of humanity and horrifically mutated creatures. All the light of civilization, the blessings of industry and science, are reduced to ash and ruin. But there are survivors. Beneath the earth, all across the United States, there are the Volts. Built by the megacorporation Voltech before the Great War, the 122 Volts were sold to a jittery public as salvation for when the bombs dropped, places where the American way of life would be preserved. Even on the scarred surface, humans survive the apocalypse. Some become ghouls, undying and rotting beings who are healed by radiation. Some lose all the culture and even the language of the USA, becoming so-called tribals. Others try desperately to restart a civilization resembling that of the old world. This is something I love about the Fallout games. They accurately portray the aftermath of catastrophic societal collapse, how a larger civilization splinters and new cultures form in the ruins. They showcase how humans endure cataclysm by remaining social animals, adapting our cultures to new events while retaining cultural memory of what went before. And in the case of multiple societies depicted in Fallout, the new societies strive to legitimate themselves by reference to pre-apocalyptic America, just as the Germanic kings who destroyed the Roman Empire used Latin as their language of law and took Roman titles. In 2189, a century after the bombs fell, 5 settlements in Southern California banded together and formed the New California Republic. They used the pre-war USA as their model, espousing ideals of civil liberties and political freedom, liberty and justice for all. By providing a government founded in higher ideals which actively cultivates a citizenry, New California proved a highly appealing alternative to the slave states, kleptocracies, and tribal societies which are more typical in apocalyptic America. By 2281, the NCR had established a nation which encompassed a vast territory and at least 700,000 people, which by the standards of the devastated and depopulated post-apocalyptic world was a massive country. In the Fallout TV series, set a mere 15 years later, organized civilization has all but disappeared again. The New California Republic was blown up by some asshole. Most of the 700,000 people who knew a democratic and relatively peaceful society apparently either died or went feral, and the wasteland as our heroine Lucy meets it is depicted in the most stock post-apocalyptic manner as an amoral dog-eat-dog land of bastards. Watching the series, I felt a curious sense of unreality. For all the graphical limitations of the Fallout games that I love, the first 2 and Fallout New Vegas, they feel like real societies, or at least competent fictional depictions of realistic societies. So why did Amazon's Fallout feel less real than these old video games? Why did the world which appeared on screen, clearly made at such expense, feel so empty and fake? Why did the show, which had such brilliant source material, eat shit? Part 1. The Decline and Fall of Rome. Societal collapse is a well-studied phenomenon. War, plague, famine, environmental catastrophe, climate change, and internal political turmoil can all destroy a social structure over time, usually in combination with one or more of the other elements. The fall of the Roman Empire is perhaps the most famous historical example of societal collapse. The idea of the decline and fall as a subject in and of itself originates with Edward Gibbon, who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, the first part of which was published in 1776. He blames Christianity for corrupting the empire's moral virtues and making it weak. Of Christians, he writes, "This indolent or even criminal disregard to the public welfare exposed them to the contempt and reproaches of the pagans, who very frequently asked, what must be the fate of the empire, attacked on every side by the barbarians, if all mankind should adopt the pusillanimous sentiments of the new sect?" To this insulting question, the Christian apologists returned obscure and ambiguous answers, as they were unwilling to reveal the secret cause of their security, the expectation that, before the conversion of mankind was accomplished, the world itself would be no more. So Gibbon is claiming here that early Christians, who believed in the imminent return of Christ and the end of the world, made for poor public servants. Why worry about the Goths and the Vandals building up strength across the frontier? Why bother to pay the border guards and keep up the fortresses if Christ will return and render all these concerns immaterial next year? Incidentally, 41% of Americans believe that Jesus will return by 2050. Why should they bother to care about climate change or adapting our 18th century democracy to the 21st century if the second coming is only 20 years away? Gibbon's view, influenced by his anti-Catholic and Enlightenment sensibilities, verges on monocausalism, the idea that one single thing led to the downfall of Rome, which is a view that most modern scholars and creditable sources avoid. However, like Gibbon, many modern opinions on the fall of Rome tend to tie their theory of a primary reason for Rome's decline and fall with whatever ills they perceive in modern society. For example, out-and-out theo-fascists like the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, blame Roman morality or the lack thereof. In his own words from a 2008 interview,
many historians, those who are objective, would look back and recognize and give some credit to the fall of Rome to not only the deprivation of the society and the loss of morals, but also to the rampant, homosexual behavior that was condoned by the society.
Economic conservatives, such as those at the Heritage Foundation, prefer laying the demise of the empire at the feet of currency devaluation, overtaxation, and that old conservative bugaboo, welfare, as in this rather overwrought article from October 2023. To fund endless foreign wars and wasteful domestic spending, Rome devalued its currency to institute a hidden tax on its people. Confiscatory taxes drove commerce out of the Roman Empire or underground in ragtag form, while idle laborers turned to the breadlines. A more liberal view is that of Douglas Boyne's Alaric the Goth, An Outsider's History of the Fall of Rome. This book heavily implies that Rome's failure to integrate Germanic peoples, who came initially as refugees and economic migrants, led to Alaric's sack of Rome in 410 CE, and by extension the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476. He, Alaric, survived a border policy that separated migrant children from their parents, and he was denied benefits he likely expected from military service. Romans were deeply conflicted over who should enjoy the privileges of citizenship. They wanted to buttress their global power, but were insecure about Roman identity. They depended on foreign goods, but scoffed at immigrants and denied foreigners their own voices and humanity. In stark contrast to the rising bigotry, intolerance, and zealotry among Romans during Alaric's lifetime, the Goths, as practicing Christians, valued religious pluralism and tolerance. Now, while I am more sympathetic to this argument and think it's better supported by historical evidence, like the Heritage Foundation, Boyne maps the crises plaguing the Roman Empire in late antiquity a little too neatly onto modern America. It wasn't as though the Goths were holding pride parades, and Emperor Valens is not a good analog for our own modern, mediocre Mussolini. Personally, I think a primary and often overlooked cause of the fall of Rome was economic stratification and the increase in the power of large landowners at the expense of the central government. This was largely the fault of the Emperor Diocletian and his reforms of the late 3rd century CE. First, a little historical context. Rome during the 3rd century was not doing so hot. The glory days of emperors like Trajan and Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius had long since passed, and from 235 to 285, the empire was divided by incessant civil wars, rebellions, barbarian invasions, the rise of new and strange religious cults, and general disorder. Civilizational collapse. But our valiant hero Diocletian managed to get the house back in order, so to speak. He was finally able to vanquish all challengers in civil wars and re-establish central authority. But after 50 years of shit hitting the fan, the treasury of the empire was almost empty. A great deal of fertile farmland was sitting unfarmed, thanks to peasants running away from their landlords and being killed or conscripted into various Roman armies. Things were not going well at all. So Diocletian, in desperate need of funds, but with very little in the way of a civil service or central administration, enlisted the wealthy landlords of Rome, senators and patricians throughout the empire, to help him collect taxes, turning their estates into a kind of semi-governmental institution. But in order to squeeze taxes from peasants, you have to have peasants. So Diocletian decreed that peasants were tied to their land by way of the tax registration. Connected with this is the supposed emergence in late antiquity of the great domains as semi-public institutions, which had the right of autopragia, that is, to collect taxes themselves. While revenues did increase for a short period, this reform had two effects which were extremely detrimental to the long-term health of the Roman state. On the one hand, it greatly empowered large landowners. By making them the primary agents of tax collection, Diocletian handed them the ability to choke the imperial treasury of funds on a whim. On the other hand, it impoverished the free men and made it more difficult to induce them into the army, since now they needed the permission of their landlord to leave. The risks of this divestment of state power into the hands of the wealthy is illustrated by the divergence in the fates of the Western and Eastern Roman empires in the 5th century CE. Western Rome collapsed in 476 CE, whereas the empire in the East, typically referred to by modern scholars as Byzantium, even though they always called themselves Roman, lasted another millennium. Why? Well, to quote Michael Kulikowski's The Tragedy of Empire, the richest Western elites were also those most likely to dabble in government. Senators were just as likely to keep their income out of imperial hands as not. In the East, by contrast, properties on a comparable scale did not exist, and so wealth was much more reliably recirculated through the imperial fisc, the treasury. So in the Western Empire, more resources were concentrated in the hands of the wealthy. And because those wealthy people had the means to subordinate the state to their private interests and to resist taxation, the Western treasury was reliably pretty empty in the 5th century, which fatally weakened the military's ability to combat the Germanic peoples who would put an end to the Western Empire. By sharp contrast, in the Eastern Empire, the emperors kept strong centralized control and broke up the large estates, resulting in a class of landowners not powerful enough to withhold money from the imperial government, thereby ensuring a steady flow of revenue into the treasuries of Constantinople, which allowed the Eastern Empire to pay for a stronger army and to simply bribe barbarians to go away and attack somewhere else, which ended up, often as not, being the western half of the empire. Whoops. Rome didn't fall in a day. It was undermined by its wealthiest citizens, who fought civil wars to try and reclaim the imperial throne, who gave their tenant farmers no reason to care about the Roman state, and who withheld taxes from the central government. War and migration were able to take down the Roman Empire not because it was too feminine or decadent, not because they had an extremely primitive welfare program, but because the systems of land distribution and taxation, which had made the Roman legions strong under the Republic and early Empire, was allowed to decay in the face of the greed of the wealthy. And because this process remained unchecked in the Western Empire, it was obliterated by the Germanic tribes. In the world of Fallout, the United States of America of 2077 is a fascist corporatocracy in steep decline. Resources of all kinds are running out. The resource wars between America and China have drained both countries dry, and the American people have lost their democratic freedoms to a government effectively comprised of the military and massive corporations, such as the defense contractor West Tech, the energy conglomerate Poseidon Energy, the robotics company Robco, and the trillion-dollar megacorporation Voltec. The American Empire, having invaded and occupied Canada and invaded China's Yangtze River Valley, is overextended, badly run, and ultimately ends up destroying the world, along with China, in the Great War of 2077. Like with the Roman Empire, one can argue that the collapse of America, though in part due to external factors, was ultimately the result of a kleptocratic government serving the interests and greed of the wealthy at the expense of the national welfare and the people. Because the Fallout games are set in the aftermath of this collapse, We necessarily see the decline and fall of this great empire through a veil, much as the denizens of early medieval Europe would have perceived the fall of the Roman Empire. A catastrophe, certainly, but one that has recessed into historical memory. Part 2. The Rise and Decline of New California. The holy trinity of Fallout games, Fallouts 1, 2, and New Vegas, have a number of interesting historical parallels to the Roman world after the fall, because they are great stories which were told by storytellers who thought about the world they were making in a deep sociological and historical way. These writers, unlike some, understood, whether instinctively or through research, that the past shapes the present and the future. And so as they wove their world, they included many threads of bygone America. When Rome fell, Romans didn't immediately stop viewing themselves as Roman. In the shrunken cities of Gaul and Italy, they still spoke a vulgar Latin, they still used old Roman coins, and they worshipped as they had before in the Christian period of the Roman Empire. Roman law was still widely used in the Germanic kingdoms which were established on the former lands of the Western Empire, even when it coexisted with Germanic tribal customs, such as the trial by ordeal. When the Franks, after 300 years of the so-called Dark Ages, re-established an empire of the West, Charlemagne had himself crowned on Christmas Day of the year 800 CE in Rome. His crowning was set to these words, recorded in the Annales Regni Francorum, as quoted in translation in King and Emperor, A New Life of Charlemagne. To Charles Augustus, the god-crowned, great, and pacific, in the sense of peaceful or serene, Emperor of the Romans, life and victory. And he was later saluted by the Pope in the customary of ancient emperors, and he was called Emperor and Augustus. The use of the Augustus title, a Latin title meaning exalted, by a Frankish king was a direct and unsubtle attempt to claim the legitimacy of the Roman Empire. And it is telling that even the chronicle which records these events, written 3 centuries after the fall of the Western Empire, was written in Latin. Similarly, in the continuity of the Fallout games, at least some Americans persist in believing that they are Americans. While there are those who become tribals, more or less completely reinventing their cultures and even their languages, the majority of the population still speaks American English, and clearly the stated ideals of America, freedom and justice for all, remain potent to some. When civilization begins to be re-established by the New California Republic, they author a constitution that seems broadly similar to the Constitution of the United States. They criminalize slavery and offer legal protections to ghouls and supermutants, who are effectively a kind of ethnic minority in this universe. And their head of state is called a president and their legislature a Congress. Just as Charlemagne took the titles of Augustus and Emperor from the great civilization which had preceded his own, so New California deliberately harkens back to the glory days of the USA before atomic hellfire. In the 2010 video game Fallout New Vegas, many characters from New California living in the Mojave Wasteland describe back west as a fairly civilized place. Though like the Empire of Charlemagne, the NCR is only a pale imitation of its predecessor, and the order it has established is far from perfect, it's a polity where in principle written laws apply equally to all citizens. It's also a nation where the people choose their own rulers and representatives in free elections. However, this new manifestation of liberty and justice for all is facing severe challenges in the year 2281, the year of the game's setting. There are references in New Vegas to the growing power of the Brahmin barons, cattle ranchers of the 2-headed cows known as Brahmin, who are able to use their wealth to influence Congress to act in their interests and against the interests of smallholder farmers of New California, which drives many of them out east, to sharecrop outside the city of New Vegas. These Brahmin barons are apparently even able to use the military to protect their private interests, weakening New Californians' ability to secure the Mojave Wasteland against Caesar's Legion, their main external threat. The Legion, as they're commonly called, is a group of ancient Rome cosplayers.
So, you dare to aid us?
To what, sir?
Strike him, Centurion, very roughly!
Who have established a brutal empire built on slavery and genocide in what was once Arizona and New Mexico. And now they are expanding west, seeking to invade and incorporate the New California Republic into their hegemony. The war is not going well for New California. as they have spread themselves too thin and their military is not focused on the existential threat which the Legion poses. So we're seeing a society facing severe external challenges that also has an extremely wealthy class of people who misuse state power for their own selfish purposes. Shit. That spells trouble. Society ending trouble, perhaps. Part 3. Vault 33. The Fallout TV series begins 15 years after the time of Fallout New Vegas, and it begins in Vault 33. The Vaults, as you recall, were built by the mega corporation Vault-Tec all across America before the Great War in 2077. While they were sold to the public as clean, safe, and comfortable places to live out the apocalypse, Vault-Tec, like most mega corporations, wasn't exactly honest with its customers. As players of the video games will know, and the show eventually reveals, most of the Vaults are designed to be social experiments, ostensibly in service of gathering data required to rebuild society in the optimal fashion once the Vault dwellers can reclaim the surface world. These experiments were often of dubious scientific value, like Vault 11's, studying a population's willingness to sacrifice individuals for the safety of the majority, using falsified threats of collective punishment, and Vault 12, medical experiment studying the effects of gradual radiation exposure. The door was designed not to seal correctly, but in this they are not unrealistic. The experiments carried out by Dr. Josef Mengele at Auschwitz II and by the Japanese Army's Unit 731 in Manchuria yielded very little useful data, but were sanctioned by their respective governments on the promise of possible future benefits. Our protagonist, Lucy McLean, is the daughter of the overseer of Vault 33, Hank McLean. As we see the Vault in Episode 1, we see a society that is in many ways a perfect encapsulation of idealized 1950s Americana. People are friendly to one another, everyone is smiling and courteous, and there's the kind of can-do American optimism which we associate with that time period. Lucy volunteers to be part of something called the Triennial Trade, which is an exchange that happens every 3 years between Vault 33 and its neighbor, Vault 32. In this instance, Vault 33 is exchanging some goods for a breedable man to get Lucy pregnant and carry on with humanity. When Lucy is preparing to meet her husband-to-be, her friend Stephanie shows her the wedding dress she'll be wearing. On the lining is written the names of all the women who have worn this dress before her, with all the dates of their weddings, and Lucy adds her name to the list. This is my favorite detail in the whole show, because it is a tradition of this community that makes it feel real and alive, that takes it from the realm of fiction and into the realm of reality. I can imagine myself in Lucy's shoes here, participating in this bridal ritual, and that's great. The trade with Vault 32 approaches, and Lucy and the people of Vault 33 go to the door which connects the two vaults. The door operator is procrastinating, and Lucy steps over and asks him what's going on. "Lucy, I love you," he says.
"We all know that, Chet."
She replies. Oof. And then continues.
"Around with your cousin, it's all well and good for kids, but it's not a sustainable long-term sexual practice, you know?"
Now, I love this. Not because I'm a fan of keeping it in the family, but because I think it accurately reflects the concerns around reproduction and genetic viability that would be part of any community isolated from outside populations for a long period of time. In small towns and isolated communities, humans often explore their sexuality by shacking up with whomever is around the same age and available. If you've ever heard the term kissing cousins, you'll know what I mean. In Lucy's case, that was her cousin, and rather than treating that kind of activity as shameful, this society has come to terms with it as a way for teenagers to blow off steam while awaiting their arranged marriages with an external population to maintain sufficient genetic diversity to avoid a Habsburg situation. Anyway, once Chet is dissuaded from his desire to keep things in-house, the door is opened and we see the people of Vault 32, who are cast into shadow and led by this rather rough-looking lady with a wrinkled face and hard expression. All these people are fairly rough and tumble in appearance, and this is a good use of visual storytelling. They don't look like the clean-cut and smiley denizens of Vault 33. The wedding happens. Vault 33 puts on a picnic amidst their cornfield with a projection of the Nebraska countryside on the wall behind them. Lucy makes awkward conversation and asks her new husband about his sperm count.
"So what's your sperm count?"
And then Lucy and her groom go back to her place to replenish and multiply. But at the end of the sex, Lucy hears distant screams and gunfire. Uh-oh. She then notices a big-ass scar on her new beau's back. When she picks up her Pip-Boy, a wrist-mounted computer all Vault dwellers are given, she uses the built-in Geiger counter to reveal that her new husband is radioactive. Oh no, he's from the surface. And this is our first big dramatic turn. A melee breaks out, there's lots of gore and ultraviolence, and we see that the people of Vault 32 are not in fact Vault dwellers, but a gang of raiders from the surface who tricked their way into the vault. At the end of the fight, the woman who leads the gang, named Moldaver, takes Lucy's father away and blows up the tunnel between Vaults 32 and 33. This is where I first started to have my doubts in this show. One thing I love about Fallouts 1, 2, and New Vegas are how interesting the various factions are. Even the raider gangs have personalities and histories, distinctive styles of dress and combat. Moldaver's raiders, by contrast, aren't terribly interesting. They have no unifying aesthetic, combat style, no shared tattoos, nothing that makes them feel coherent as a social unit. Only Moldaver, who seems to know Hank and also Lucy's dead mother, sticks out at all. This isn't lethal to the narrative by any means. However, it makes the raiders feel akin to generic bad guys and less like memorable villains. To be clear, I have no problem whatsoever with beginning a story with a mysterious villain whose motivations we don't understand. I don't need or want to learn everything about the antagonist at the start of the narrative. But the mysterious baddie generally works best when the viewer is left with interesting questions about the villain's beliefs, place in a social structure, and/or their motivations. In Moldaver's case, we're given almost nothing. We don't know enough, from dialogue or implied by their appearance and actions, to formulate interesting questions. So Hank McClane has been kidnapped, and Lucy wants to track him down and get him back. But the governing council of the Vault absolutely forbids her to leave, because to open the Vault's main door could make them vulnerable to whatever is lurking on the surface. Clearly Vault 32's door got opened, and look what happened to them. So what will Lucy do now? Well, this is a television show, and we've just dealt with the inciting incident, so Lucy, her brother, and her cousin with benefits all get up to the main door and help Lucy leave the vault so she can go searching for her father. Part 4. Lucy lives in a society. When Lucy McClane leaves Vault 33, she emerges into a daunting and desolate wasteland. These first scenes of the surface were filmed on the Skeleton Coast of Namibia, which is the world's oldest and possibly driest desert, due to the prevailing winds coming off of the land and towards the sea. Lucy is crossing over sand dunes, passing by utterly ruined houses, and there's a paucity of any sort of vegetation or water feature. I'll mention here that I'm already a little irritated by this particular landscape. In coastal Southern California, this degree of hyper-aridity is simply impossible due to the prevailing winds coming from the Pacific and bearing moisture onto the land. So no matter how fucked up the world got from nuclear bombs, there's an ocean right there and there will be rain. Too much rain for these sand dunes, but I digress. Okay, just a little more digression. These sand dunes would make plenty of sense if this vault was on the other side of a few mountain ranges. Okay, I'm done being a geography nerd, for now. She goes to bed by a fire, and wakes up to a dog and some spooky scientist who tells her she's an idiot for falling asleep by a lit campfire, and then becomes the first of many surface dwellers to tell Lucy the surface isn't like the vault. You'll die up here. Go back to the vault. Before fading into the night. She next encounters a farmer. And here is where the unreality of Amazon's Fallout really began to set in for me. Because this farmer has exactly one tomato plant growing in the middle of a completely barren landscape. And just before this scene, we see that within walking distance, there's a verdant forest of oak trees. Let's think about that for a second. One tomato man, who takes all of Lucy's fresh water because she, innocent naif that she is, gives him her bottle, is struggling to grow a single tomato plant and is out of water. I guess he must have had a well or something at some point, because the human body can't go long without water. We can manage a month or even more without food depending on our fat reserves, but without water we're dead inside of a week. And within walking distance, within sight of one tomato man's one tomato farm, there is a lush green forest. Part 4.2. Farming and why towns exist. Why in the hell is one tomato man trying to grow tomatoes in the desert when there is land fertile and wet enough to sustain oak trees about 2 miles away? This is undeniably a nitpick, but it encapsulates the sense of unreality which made the show so frustrating for me. The show was filmed in New Jersey, Namibia, and Utah. These are 3 vastly different landscapes, and when they are placed side by side, when characters move from the utter desolation of the Skeleton Coast to a verdant forest, it's jarring. The show depicts literally the driest place on Earth, save perhaps Antarctica, being within walking distance of New Jersey, the goddamn Garden State, and thus begins to unravel all the logic behind where people live and why they live there in this show. As Lucy continues, she goes to the town of Philly, which she is again told is very dangerous and bad and scary, and she's too innocent and will likely meet a grim end there. She journeys to said town, and the geographical batshittery of this place gets worse. Philly is a post-apocalyptic town set in the middle of a dense forest. It's depicted as a kind of anarchy, one of those lawless towns that are a sci-fi staple since the day of that wretched hive of scum and villainy, Star Wars' Mos Eisley. Though I'll note even Mos Eisley has its own bosses and social structures. The Empire keeps some sort of peace, and the Hutts throw their not inconsiderable weight around. Yet Philly, this lawless society, filled with thieves and unscrupulous traders, apparently is also full of environmentalists, because all the oak trees are still standing. All this land fertile enough to support a lush forest is not being used to farm or to pasture Brahmin. The trees aren't being used as construction material or even firewood. This rapacious society has the attitude of goddamn wood elves when it comes to the forest around them. Towns exist for reasons. They tend to be situated to take advantage of some natural resource or strategic position, or sometimes they're founded because the site has been given a spiritual significance. In a post-apocalyptic world, when humanity is, in many senses, set back to a much earlier stage of civilization, towns should be developing near arable land or perhaps near ruins that still have many salvageable resources, or given how dangerous the wasteland is, perhaps an easily defensible position atop a hill to protect them from raiders. Insofar as I can gather, Philly has no raison d'être, no reason to be. They have splendid natural resources, timber, fertile soil, and water, all of which would be so valuable and vital in a wasteland where society is being rebuilt from the ground up, but they make no use of these resources whatsoever. All the buildings are cobbled together out of dross from the fallen society before. There's no new carpentry or log cabins making use of all these damn trees. This is not a town where some tree-hugging cult holds sway and guards the sacred woodland, even though that would be cool and give a reason for this pristine old-growth forest to still be thriving amidst the desolation in which One Tomato Man is failing to make a living. One Tomato Man might even make sense if Philly has aggressively claimed all the good land around them and kills anyone not from the town who tries to take advantage of those resources. That might be an interesting detail, no? A way to enrich the world building? On the subject of resources, how do the people of Philly feed themselves? Our only hint comes as Lucy enters town, and vendors are selling iguana meat and dog meat. This bothers me, and not just because I love dogs. Dogs are carnivores. They need to eat meat. It is inefficient to raise dogs for food, especially in so resource-poor a world as the wasteland. Perhaps these people are hunting wild dogs, but that's an even harder task, because the feral dogs of the wasteland would be as vicious as coyotes and probably a good deal smarter. A better use of a captive dog would be to help with the hunting, taking down the iguanas and radroaches and whatnot. But let's consider what this meat market says about this senseless town. Human societies, with very few exceptions, rest on a foundation of grains and legumes. Every civilization which has built cities has relied on agriculture. Iguana meat and dog meat should be luxury goods. This market should have people selling corn and bags of wheat or flour, and Philly should be surrounded by fields. But instead, the showrunners didn't think about the logic of a post-apocalyptic world, and they went for aesthetics over common sense, and went for references from the games that people expect. Hence One Tomato Man somehow surviving in the hyper-arid waste, hence the dog meat, and hence the people of Philly utterly failing to do the thing humans have damn near always done in villages, which is to make use of the land around them. Maybe you don't care about how Philly eats, and that's fine. I'm not saying you have to, but this is a missed opportunity for contextual storytelling, a missed chance to make this place memorable and real. And it's a bad sign moving forward. Part 4.3. Onwards into the Waste. As Lucy enters this town, she eventually rediscovers our creepy scientist, who carries the MacGuffin in his own neck. At this point, the ghoul shows up, and just as a quick aside, I really dislike the ghoul. Not Cooper Howard before the war. I'll go to those scenes and go in depth on that society and the geopolitics of that era later. But the ghoul is a one-dimensional, jaded asshole with a goal in mind that is not directly revealed until one of the final lines of the season. He is a stock amoral badass in an amoral world, the kind of character who will be so much better loved than he deserves, because America loves a cynical reimagining of a Western. He shoots up the town and shoots Dr. Creepy Scientist in the foot. While the ghoul's busy fighting Maximus, another character from another faction I'll get to in due course, Lucy and the scientist duck into a nearby shop, and there transpires a scene which encapsulates what this show could have been. The balance of gore and humor which is so quintessentially Fallout. Ma June, the owner of the shop the scientist is hiding in, pulls out a crate of Jim's limbs, which has to be the funniest visual gag in the whole show. Jim's limbs, the veteran's choice. I laughed my ass off when I saw that crate. I did question the utility of a replacement limb that meat grinds away the stump you have left in a horrifying way. Why anyone would purchase that product if they had any other options, but I accepted it as a joke, because perhaps surprisingly given all the nitpicking I do, I am capable of suspension of disbelief. I don't need everything to make sense, but in order for me to really enjoy a piece of speculative fiction, I need the nonsensical stuff to feel real within the universe depicted, which Jim's limbs did. It's just a shame that this is one of the very few moments that manages to strike this balance. Lucy escapes with his scientist, who, by the way, is a defector from the Enclave. I would like to talk more about the Enclave as a faction in a society, but given that I'm broadly trying to base my critiques off of what is presented in the show, as contrasted and compared to the lore of the video games and real-world antecedents, I can't, because the show never gives us a sense of who the Enclave is beyond baddies who incinerate underweight puppies. They don't tell us why they are the way they are, or how powerful or important they are in the general scheme of the world. However, the Enclave is a recognizable faction to fans of the game, so Todd Howard and the Amazon goons shoehorned them in so they could say to fans of the games, "Oh look, the Enclave! That's a thing you remember, right? The Enclave?" Yet they absolutely failed to do anything of substance or interest with them, which is a theme with the factions from the games depicted in the show. The scientist falters and then commits suicide in the shadow of a fallen Soviet satellite. I liked this. It's very funny how nonchalantly he informs Lucy that he's taken a cyanide pill.
No, you see, I've just taken a cyanide pill. What?
And I liked the subtle world building of this Soviet satellite, which hints that this world's history took a very different course from ours. The USSR didn't collapse in 1991. It was presumably destroyed in the Great War of 2077. It's these kinds of details, which are richly scattered throughout the Fallout games, even the Fallout games I don't particularly like, which makes a world feel real. So, good job. Yet, I must return to my kvetching. Lucy saws off the scientist's head and continues onward towards Moldaver to find her dad, hoping to trade the head and the MacGuffin in it. The ghoul catches up to her, but the head is lost to a finger axolotl which springs out of a heavily irradiated lake. The fingerlotl is lured back by the ghoul, who uses Lucy as bait, reinforcing the message that everyone is out for themselves on the surface, and Lucy is naive and deserves to be ill-treated for being naive. I hate this theme of the show, because it's a tired refrain, and in my view, does not accurately reflect how humans work. Part 4.4. We live in a society. We are social creatures by nature. We like to bond in tribes and communities. I could happily buy that the various tribes and communities of the wasteland are hostile to one another, but in a world as dangerous as the one depicted, people would be highly motivated to band together. Adversity makes communities who, by fighting and struggling together, form stronger bonds and collective identities. When Roman central authority crumbled in the 5th century CE, the cities of Italy began their path towards fiercely parochial and independent ways of being, culminating in the 10th and 11th centuries with the foundations or solidifications of various city-state republics, from the most serene Republic of Venice to the republics of Florence, Pisa, and Siena in Tuscany. The city became an object of reverence and fierce patriotism. Venetians even bristled when they were called Italians, because it diminished their own great city and nation which they saw separate from Italy. Italy was, to use Bismarck's phrase, nothing more than a geographical expression. The collapse of central authority leads to the intensification of local authority and bonds. Wastelanders should be intensely loyal to one another and clannish, dare I say tribal, but instead they're depicted as individualistic bastards who fuck each other's chickens and discard the human need for safety and stability to participate in this all-against-all war, this Hobbesian clusterfuck that every hack writer thinks will persist for decades after an apocalypse. This is a trend of post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction that has always sat ill with me, because it transposes the modern atomization of society, which is a highly artificial byproduct of our fucked-up economic system and culture, onto societies that no longer have the atomizing factors, societies which could not long persist without common action for the common good of the group, tribe, town, or nation. I think death would be a constant companion in the wasteland, but like most deaths throughout human history, most of it wouldn't be the result of violence between humans. It would be disease and untreated infections as a result of the near-total breakdown in any kind of medical system. It would be starvation, when Tomato Man's future doesn't look good, and when violence was the cause of death, it would be far less likely to be single interpersonal conflicts within communities, and far more likely to be the result of organized raids or attacks by one community or people upon another. Part 4.5. Organs are us. During the Fingerlotl attack, Lucy accidentally destroys the ghoul's anti-zombie juice, the juice which keeps him from turning feral. Oh no. So the ghoul abandons pursuit of the MacGuffin, reasoning that Fingerlotls are fairly constipated by nature, and goes to a Super Duper Mart, another recognizable brand from Fallout, where he trades Lucy to some organ harvesters in exchange for 60 vials of the anti-zombie juice. Why is the Super Duper Mart in the middle of an otherwise abandoned city, a city that's weirdly intact given 200 years of erosion and also having been hit with hydrogen bombs, the headquarters of not so much an organ-harvesting gang as two bozos and one ancient robot named Snip Snip, who is great, by the way. I've got no complaints about Snip Snip. Why? Who's buying these organs? Where are the doctors who are competent enough to transplant organs? Snip Snip is a kind of medical robot, but he uses his buzzsaw to vivisect folks for their organs without any kind of proper surgical procedure or disinfection, so I wouldn't trust him to perform an organ transplant. Who is living long enough in this violent wasteland to have organ failures that are gradual enough to justify a transplant, but severe enough to need one? I think you could probably hand-wave most of this away. So why do I bring it up? Because it, like the forest around Philly, undermines any reality this world might have and feels shallow, less like something that might actually happen in the post-apocalyptic waste, and more like something some writer stuck in for action and comedy. If we had seen back in Philly some doctor advertising fresh organs or some such, I would find myself going, oh, that's why this place exists. Cool. But there's not that kind of connective tissue between locations in this world. Organs Are Us exists solely to be a place that Lucy can prove once again she's a good person and that the ghoul is a selfish asshole. It has nothing to do with Philly. It's mentioned only once again for a scene that doesn't need to be there, and Lucy destroys the place, leaves the anti-zombie medicine with the ghoul to prove that she's better than him and will never be like him, and then she pieces out. It pisses me off because Organs Are Us and Philly could have mutually reinforced one another as living, breathing places, but by standing in utter isolation, they both feel like sets. So with all of my nitpicking, I can hear an objection often made to uptight nerds like yours truly. It's about the story, not the nitty-gritty. And I have no desire to join the ranks of CinemaSins wannabes. I'm not out here saying, why didn't the Eagles just fly the ring to Mordor? Why not? Because we wouldn't have the Lord of the Rings if that happened. My complaint is that the writers seem almost ideologically opposed to the sort of cohesive, sociologically informed world-building that gave the original Fallout games their cultural cachet. I'm trying to point out places where they could have enhanced the story, but instead, by not thinking about how this world would actually work, they made the story thinner and weaker. Lucy goes on. She meets Maximus for the second time, who is stranded in his power armor, frees him, and they set off together in pursuit of the MacGuffin, which is now in the hands of Maximus's squire, Thaddeus. And in the course of this pursuit, we get 2 items of sociological interest. The first of which dings the world's believability a bit, and the second which fucks everything beyond repair. Part 4.6. A Stranger Meets a Stranger. There's a scene that I initially liked because it shows a historically accurate tension that pre-modern peoples faced when one band of travelers met another on a road or caravan route in territory that effectively has no firm laws nor peacekeepers. Lucy and Maximus meet these 2 grungy folk at a railway bridge that they both need to cross. They're understandably wary of one another, given how lawless the wasteland is, and this doesn't bother me even a little bit. In ancient times and well beyond, meeting strangers on a trade route or path was always a worrying moment. You don't know if the others are bandits or from some rival city, or perhaps just traders or pilgrims with no ill intent. This is why from very early on in history, merchants and pilgrims would band into larger traveling groups, caravans, to guard themselves against bandits and threats from the wilds. We see the danger of chance encounters like these illustrated in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. As I was on the move, I passed close by a spot where 3 roads met, and in that place I met a herald and a horse-drawn carriage, with a man inside, just as you described. The guide there tried to force me off the road, and the old man too got personally involved. In my rage I lashed out at the driver, who was shoving me aside. The old man, seeing me walk past him in the carriage, kept his eye on me, and with his double whip struck me on the head right here on top. Well, I retaliated in good measure, and with the staff I held I hit him a quick blow, and knocked him from his carriage to the road. He lay there on his back. Then I killed them all. So in the Bronze Age, so simple an insult as being told rudely to move aside for someone presumed superior could result in a murder and eventually fucking your own mother. And in the Fallout world, fallen as it is, it makes sense for Bronze Age conventions to apply. Every meeting on the road is a dangerous situation that could potentially end in death or motherfucking. And the situation ends up going almost as poorly as Oedipus meeting his father on the road to Thebes. Maximus shoots both of the strangers, they get him in the arm. Then Maximus tells us that these 2 are fiends. And yet again, a faction familiar to fans of the games is being name-dropped with absolutely no consideration to what it means to the story of the world. The Fiends were a raider gang that lived in the ruins to the west and south of the city of New Vegas. They were all chem addicts, or drug addicts. For some reason the show abandons the in-game convention of referring to drugs as chems, which is a shame in my view. And they wore big horn or sheep skulls atop their heads. Even though the Fiends were probably one of the less interesting factions in Fallout New Vegas, they had a kind of culture and customs, with lots of violence, rape, and cannibalism, sure, but it's a culture nonetheless. But there's no elaboration here in the show. They're fiends, Maximus says, and explains that means they're cannibals. But there's no hint of what their culture is, where they originally come from, why they might be living this far west. Nada. It's a wasted opportunity to provide depth to the world, to connect to the video games in a substantial way rather than just referencing a thing fans will probably sort of remember. But we're not to the worst bit yet. After the bridge, they continue, and then this fucking billboard appears. And any possible enjoyment I had in this goddamn show was ripped away from me. Part 5. Poor New California, we hardly knew ye. Lucy and Maximus arrive at the lip of a comically large and regularly shaped crater in the ground. The cityscape around is, by the way, functionally untouched. Dilapidated skyscrapers stand close to the edge of this giant hole, which is immersion-breaking as shit. Craters this big have ejecta, and if there was a blast this big, no structure would still be standing at the lip. And also perfectly intact is a billboard for Shady Sands, former capital of the New California Republic, which retroactively makes every episode since Lucy left the vault so much worse in terms of the culture of the people left behind. It is explained by Maximus that Shady Sands was destroyed when he was a child, and here is the point when I fully realized where we were in the Fallout timeline, and my heart broke. This show is set in 2296. In 2281, the last time we saw New California in the Fallout series, New California was a sprawling country with a population of 700,000, which had restored law and order to the wastes, restarted industry and public education, and was generally rebuilding the old world one step at a time. It had some problems, as discussed, but it was the most powerful nation in North America that we know of. And yet, it left an impression so faint on its supposed heartland that I didn't even realize until this point that the show was set after New California had been established, not before. Part 5.2 Heirs of the Empire. Remember what I said about the Romans after the fall of Rome? How even centuries later, European societies legitimated themselves on Roman law and traditions. How it was a long time, some 500 years, before Italians stopped thinking of themselves as Romans. Hell, if you live in the United States, our upper house of Congress is still called a Senate. Our national motto is in Latin, and we use symbols of Roman authority on our Great Seal. The fall of Rome is a powerful concept and rhetorical tool in modern politics because in some sense, we still perceive ourselves as heirs of the Roman Empire. Rome's allure reaches across the centuries, and its influence is baked into our lives on the deepest levels. If you are American or British, all of your major political parties have names that would be recognizable to a speaker of Latin: Republican, Democrat, Labor, Conservative, and Reform. If you use any academic or professional language in English, you are using words either taken straight from or adapted from Latin. Even the Greek words tend to be reflected through their Latin orthographies. Rome has shaped the world more fully than any other empire save perhaps the British Empire and the United States. And both America and Britain are, to some extent, the daughters of Rome. The past is deeply meaningful to the present, whether or not the vast majority of people think about it very often. So why, on earth, was I able to go 5 episodes without realizing the NCR ever existed in this wasteland? At most, the NCR was destroyed 15 years ago. Everyone we see in Philly is an adult, and most of them appear to be in their 30s or older. You're telling me these degenerates all spent their youth in what was once a civilized society? There's no indication of that whatsoever. No cultural impact. Nothing of what you would expect to see so soon after the collapse of what had been an orderly society. People don't revert to beasts when things fall apart. You don't lose your education just because your capital city has been blown off the face of the earth. Your cultural values will still likely be a cornerstone of who you are, perhaps even more so if your culture has been subjected to horrific tragedy. I'm an American. I believe in liberty and justice for all this nation's faults, for all its hypocrisies, for all the likelihood that our own society is in a crisis that may bring down this iteration of this republic. I'll never stop believing in freedom, the rule of law, and democracy. Even if the bomb falls tomorrow morning, I'll still be an American when the sun goes down. Part 5.3 Where Art Thou, New California? So where are the New Californians? Philly is within 2 days' walking distance of what used to be Shady Sands, which in the original continuity of Fallout, by the way, was originally not located in the Los Angeles area, but well north of it. Shady Sands, so named because it's in the fucking desert, not LA. Philly should logically, therefore, be populated mainly by people who lived under the NCR's government and laws, because again, the NCR wasn't just that one city. It had a population of 700,000 people spread from nearly San Francisco down to Baja California. The people of Philly are made even more one-dimensional by this creative choice. They should be like the Romans of the 480s, maybe ruled by a barbarian king, losing the glory they once had, but still assigning worth and value to the traditions and culture of the society they were born into. Just because Odoacer is your king doesn't mean you stop calling yourself a senator and patrician of Rome. The by then Catholic Romans didn't abandon their Catholicism, even though their Gothic overlords were Arians, the religion, not the race, and thus, in their eyes, heretics. They kept their traditions, continued speaking a Vulgate Latin, and referred to themselves as Romans. Not even a generation removed from the destruction of New California, however, and the wasteland is functionally behaving as though it had never existed. And this is in service of a common misconception, that societies which undergo catastrophe collapse all the way down to the individual level. It's that trope I mentioned earlier. Apocalypses turn everyone into amoral bastards who no longer care about their previous culture. But not only is this against well-established laws of history, it's boring. Which is by far the greater sin in a work of narrative fiction. In the next episode, Lucy and Maximus find themselves in another vault, Vault 4, which has taken in refugees from Shady Sands. The Overseer, a native vault dweller, is used as this really clumsy send-up of anti-immigration sentiment as he talks about how the Surfies, an ethnic slur, can't take a joke about how their city was blown up. It's not great. Later we see these same surface dwellers cum refugees enact a ritual of grief with orgiastic overtones. They get shirtless, men and women alike, and rub ashes on themselves, ashes apparently containing their dead relatives. But okay, here's some vestige of culture. But it doesn't have anything to do with the society of New California we saw in Fallout 2 and in Fallout New Vegas. It's a weirdly cultic ritual that culminates in the big dumb reveal that they view Moldaver, the raider leader from the first episode, as a messiah who will restore their republic. But they do not look at her as a freedom fighter or president in exile. These people who had a secular education in a fairly godless society literally believe she's magic, for some reason. Reasons that were never told, by the way. They call her the Flame Mother, but why she's called this is never explained or even hinted at. Now, I wouldn't hate this so much if it weren't the first time we see it, but the surface should be crawling with people like this. People wearing NCR insignias, people who reminisce about the good old days. Decent people from a decent society who yearned to reclaim it. Lucy should not have met nothing but hostility and disbelief with her okie dokie golden rule shtick. She should have been a poignant reminder to a traumatized people of the values they'd lost. But it's easier to write a fish-out-of-water narrative if you keep the dichotomies simple. Easier, but not better. Philly makes even less sense now. Imagine with me, if you will, that the US federal government gets blown up. All of our nuclear weapons are somehow destroyed by China in a surprise attack. Washington, D.C. is gone. Let's say even most of our major cities are destroyed. In fact, for a moment, I'd like to point to another piece of post-apocalyptic media, the 2006 CBS show Jericho, which depicts an America which undergoes a massive nuclear attack, resulting in the collapse of central government. Now, this is not a perfect show. I'm not even convinced it's a good show, really, but I think the way it portrays small-town America in the wake of nuclear catastrophe is really good. It shows that local authority becomes a focal point for people's hopes and needs. The people of Jericho remain proudly American, and they band together under their mayor to try and protect and preserve their little community. This is what should have happened in the little towns of New California that weren't blown up. New Californians should be thinking of themselves, in some respects, still as New Californians, just as the people of Jericho, Kansas still thought of themselves as Americans. So how was it a fucking twist that New California even existed in this world? Much less that it's already been destroyed. Any show worth its salt that wanted to tell this story should be making us ask from Episode 2, what happened to the NCR? And have Episode 5's showcasing of the ruins of Shady Sands be a payoff to that question, not a reveal that the NCR even existed. Part 5.4. Deleting New California. Philly being a cultureless anarchy less than 15 years after the destruction of their previously successful and thriving society is the result not of thoughtful world-building, but of lazy writing. It's the result of wanting a stock post-apocalyptic town like Megaton or Diamond City from Fallouts 3 and 4 respectively, and wanting a wretched hive of scum and villainy, and doing a paint-by-numbers version of these tropes without thinking about how towns work or how society in general works. I'd like to briefly contrast this with the city depicted on the planet Ferrix in Disney Plus's Andor, which is a show that succeeds in making a fantastic sci-fi world feel so very real in so many ways. There is so much we learn about the culture and society of Ferrix through throwaway lines, set dressing, and the way people speak with one another. There's a tower with this intricate anvil on it where a dedicated hammerer rings in the workday. This show's not just a community focal point, but also how deeply the industrial nature of this society is baked into their culture. We learn about the traditional funerary customs of Ferrix, where the cremated ashes are baked into a brick which is put into a wall of remembrance, further reinforcing this idea of a people who are proud of their craftsmanship, their hard work, and the city which is not only built by them, but of them. This is a show that thought long and hard about the societies it portrays, and it doesn't need to explain every little thing to do it. It just puts the right details in the right places and the gorgeous sets reinforce on an architectural level the character of the society they contain. Todd Howard didn't create the New California Republic, and he didn't ever really interact with it in his 2 games, which, while fun in their own ways, are story-wise so much weaker than the first 2 games in Fallout New Vegas. But this television show is set in California, so Todd Howard et al. Have to deal with the NCR, and they deal with it by literally wiping it off the face of the earth, and then having most of the characters and the world behave as though it never existed. The final scenes of Season 1 take place in the one place where New California is preserved to some degree, Moldaver's compound at the Griffith Observatory, which has a farm in a fertile location, so yay, they got something right. And Moldaver, who we saw in Episode 1 leading a gang of raiders as brutish as any of the uninteresting gangs in Fallout 3, is suddenly a tragic martyr figure. She's turned into a pretty unambiguous good character in order to make the big twist that Lucy's father is in fact the baddie who blew up Shady Sands. Why did he do it? So that eventually the Volts can take possession of a surface where humanity is otherwise extinct and build their capitalist utopia as outlined at the end of Cooper Howard's story set in the days leading up to the Great War of 2077. I could absolutely accept that New California collapsed as a result of the factors I mentioned earlier in this video. External pressure from better organized adversaries and elite capture of societal resources resulting in the impoverishment of both the people and the state. But that collapse should feel real and immediate. Even if Lucy's dad had enough nukes to blow up every major settlement in the NCR should be a felt presence on the surface from the moment Lucy encounters an actual town full of people, in the way that Rome and Roman culture would loom over any story set in Italy in the last few decades of the 5th century CE. The people of Griffith Observatory don't feel real because we aren't given the time to know them, and how the narrative asks us to view them has no consistency. In the first episode, they were brutish raiders with no culture, bandits who would take advantage of the hospitality of Vault 33 before murdering them in a cowardly surprise attack. We see them through the eyes of the people of the Vault, and so we see barbarians. In the last episode, they're heroic defenders of their last little vestige of a prior civilization, a civilization that lasted more than a century, yet made almost no impression on the wasteland of Southern California. I can hear an argument someone might make, if anyone actually watches this 2-hour video by some rando about the Fallout TV series and societal collapse. But that juxtaposition is interesting, right? Perhaps it shows the duality of man, how people can be both good and bad. And I would concede that point, if Moldaver wasn't portrayed in the last few episodes as being a deeply caring person who wants the best for all the people of the wasteland, who wants the cold fusion MacGuffin to make the lives of everyone, from one tomato man to the bastards of Philly, better. So why, when she was invading Vault 33 specifically to kidnap Lucy's dad, did she permit her soldiers to murder dozens of innocent people? When presumably pulling out a shit ton of weapons and herding the denizens of the Vault into a corner while she extracted their overseer would have worked better and not resulted in the loss of so many of her own people, who again, she's supposed to care deeply about. It's because there's not a consistency between the Moldaver we see at the beginning of the show and at the end of the show. Like the utter dearth of cultural continuity between the recently destroyed NCR and the town of Philly, like the very geography of the wasteland, the individual points of character and plot are as diffuse as New Jersey and Namibia. Aside from a few flags, you would not know this community to be the last vestige of the NCR. Moldaver's past is left murky. For all the time we spent getting sidetracked by bullshit in the boring middle episodes of this show, we don't get any time with these people who represent a light that was snuffed out. Then it doesn't even matter. Everyone at Griffith is massacred by the Brotherhood of Steel. Lucy's dad escapes in a suit of Brotherhood power armor. Lucy and the ghoul go after him together with no apparent animosity or mistrust on Lucy's part, despite the fact that the ghoul tortured her and sold her for organs. Lucy's only character growth is to be hardened and to now want to find her father in order to kill him for what he did to Shady Sands, rather than to rescue him. The ghoul hasn't grown at all. He started the show as an amoral murderer chasing a MacGuffin, and now he's an amoral murderer chasing a man. Part 5.5. If New California means as much to you as New California means to me. The New California Republic represented the ideals of America. I loved this faction when I played the games because I would want to restore something like the USA if the USA fell apart. I would want a new constitution without the vestiges of dysfunction intended to preserve slavery, but the fundamental ideals which underlie the Declaration of Independence and the good parts of the Constitution are sacred to me. The ringing words of the Declaration, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, still send a chill down my spine. In a world where America spiraled downwards into McCarthyist fascism before being destroyed, New California represents the enduring power of the ideals which undergird America. I'm not a huge fan of most of the Founding Fathers, save for Thomas Paine, but the words those men wrote inspired the figures in American history who I revere. Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Thaddeus Stevens, Jeanette Rankin, Eugene Debs, Henry Wallace, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Martin Luther King Jr. I love the NCR's very existence in the Fallout universe because it shows that liberty and justice do not belong to one time period. They don't belong to one polity. They are sacred ideals which can never be killed so long as human beings breathe and think. No system of slavery has ever existed without force. They all require the repressive power and violence of states and masters to keep them in place, because a man in chains will always yearn to have the chains struck from his wrists. And even though the high ideals of justice are so frequently perverted, so often used as tools of oppression, even tiny children realize when they or others are treated unfairly, and will protest that unfairness. The yearning for justice exists in all of us. The NCR held aloft that same torch which Lady Liberty holds over New York Harbor, that golden light of freedom that is the equal inheritance of every part of humanity. The light of liberty may be a great flame in a free nation governed by her own citizenry, or a tiny candle of hope in the heart of a prisoner in the grimmest concentration camp, but no matter how small, no matter how many times it's snuffed out, the embers burn in the human heart. And that is the light which Todd Howard and co. decided to snuff out from this universe because they don't know what to do with the NCR. But the loss of the NCR doesn't even matter, because the NCR in the television show is nothing but a reference and a hollow set dressing. All that the NCR meant to me in the games, imperfect as it was, does not cross over to the show, because in order for it to cross over, the writers would have had to suspend their relentless cynicism and actually take heart in an ideal, if only for a moment, which requires a sincerity and vulnerability that they just don't seem to possess. We live in an age of cynicism and despair. Capitalism is killing our planet, the youth are literally called doomers, and the message of this show, intentional or not, is that it's right to be pessimistic and jaded, to not care, because every faction in society will destroy each other anyway. Personal decency may be a virtue, as Lucy illustrates, but it's a weakness too, and in the end everything goes to shit.
It's the same thing that always happens. Everyone wants to save the world, they disagree on how.
Every faction will destroy one another over and over in an endless cycle. I reject this idea. I will not yield hope for a better tomorrow to the cynicism of a show about the apocalypse and its aftermath that misses one of the best parts of the genre, showing how humanity can rebuild and endure. Despair is an understandable reaction to the state of our world, to the death in Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan, to dysfunctional politics and the rise of out-and-out fascism. But I will not yield my hope for a better tomorrow. My hope that even if things get much worse, we humans can still make things better in the future. What President Lincoln said at Gettysburg in 1863, amidst America's greatest internal cataclysm to date, still holds true. It's what the NCR, however imperfect it may have been, represented in the Fallout series before this thoughtless deletion. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Part 5.6. Why this feels so bad. The show made me so upset because it had multiple chances to tell a story of real depth and worth, and missed all of them. It could have brought forth from the murk of the past all which made the good Fallout games such rich and vibrant stories. It could have still ended with the destruction of this NCR base, but that tragedy should have had the weight of the eclipse of the sun of liberty, not just, oh, everyone died, so sad. In this base whose people we don't know, over a MacGuffin that doesn't make sense, the fall of Griffith Observatory to the authoritarian and vaguely theocratic Brotherhood should hurt, and it would hurt so much more if we had known from the start what the past of this world was. If people in Philly weren't just stock bastards, but traumatized survivors looking to Moldaver for hope. In order for a tragedy to land, you have to have given us real hope for something better. You can't snuff out a light that wasn't there. Because of the way the NCR is written in the show, as a vague organization that you can only really understand if you know the lore of the games, it is too thin and insubstantial to be meaningful. The Wasteland's past, like the Wasteland itself, feels empty and unreal. When the Brotherhood storm Griffith, I'm not sad, just frustrated by the big dumb ending to this big dumb show. Speaking of the Brotherhood. Part 6. The Goddamn Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel is the most iconic faction in the Fallout games. They have been the face of most of the flagship games and appear in every one of the games in one form or another. To quote the Fallout Wiki, the Brotherhood's core purpose is to preserve advanced technology and regulate its usage. This is because they believe humanity cannot be trusted with the means to destroy itself, and they acquire technology to prevent another apocalypse. That's an interesting premise. Somewhat. But you may notice they don't actually do anything with this technology. In all of the games, the Brotherhood are never shown to be actually establishing some kind of government or society outside their heavily fortified bases. They don't use their technological and military prowess to establish some kind of empire, to create a Pax Fraternica over the wasteland. They hoard pre-war tech for some indeterminate future to come. But they have really cool armor. Like, really cool armor, you guys. Before the end of the world, the US military developed this power armor for use against the Chinese, and it has a really cool aesthetic, and it makes you super strong and resistant to radiation, and it's so cool, you guys. Like, it makes American soldiers look like medieval knights, and the Brotherhood of Steel behaves like medieval knights. And doesn't every little lad kind of want to be a knight? That's all fine. The power armor is cool. But if you take the power armor away from the Brotherhood of Steel, are they still interesting? In some of the games, absolutely. My favorite depiction of the Brotherhood is in Fallout New Vegas, and it's because their single-minded goal to preserve and regulate advanced tech has resulted in their complete marginalization. In the real world, knightly orders that remained powerful did so by establishing vast secular domains, like the Teutonic Knights on the shores of the Baltic Sea. Part 6.2. The Teutonic Order. The Teutonic Order is one of the most obvious real-world parallels to the Brotherhood of Steel. Though originally founded in the Crusader state of Acre in the Middle East, by the early 13th century the Teutonic Order's primary endeavor was to wage war against the pagans of the Baltic Sea, the Old Prussians, Lithuanians, and other Balto-Slavic peoples who still remained unchristianized. Like the Brotherhood of Steel, the Teutonic Order were technologically superior to the populations around their established bases, though the difference was not so stark, to be sure. But unlike the Brotherhood of Steel, the Teutonic Order created a state that was defined institutionally and socially by religion and war, the so-called Ordenstaat, and by 1300 the Order entrenched itself as a sole ruler of a large state in northern Europe, in addition to all the chapter houses and castles they possessed beyond the Ordenstaat in Germany and Italy. The state of the Teutonic Order remained a major European power for 2 centuries, and did so by building up a society of German colonists and Balto-Slavic peasants who were their subjects. They were not a good government for the Baltic peoples. They had annual peasant hunts and frequently tortured those they suspected of backsliding into paganism, but they were a government which extracted resources from their subjects to fund their ongoing crusades and wars and to build new castles to project their power. Under their protection also blossomed a number of Germanic cities of the Hanseatic League, which, while legally independent of the Order, paid tribute to it and provided a valuable service by linking their domains with the markets of Europe. So in a show that took the time to think about its factions, one might expect the Brotherhood of Steel, if it is still powerful, to be operating in a similar way. They can still be bastards and sort of the antagonists, but I think that works better if there are communities which are suffering beneath the Brotherhood's boot, subjected to them and being drained of resources to support this weird knightly order with its creepy clerics. This creates more possibilities for interesting conflict both betwixt Brotherhood and people and within the Brotherhood itself, as perhaps characters who believe in the Brotherhood as a force for good are forced to confront the realities of its authoritarianism and exploitation of wasteland populations. But this is neither shown nor hinted at, save for the violent occupation of Philly. Despite having a seeming predominance in terms of technology and military force in post-apocalyptic America, the Brotherhood remains completely uninterested in establishing anything like the state of the Teutonic Order. As for their supplies, well, we get the dumbest concept in the whole show, which serves beautifully to underline how little thought these writers and showrunners put into the mechanics of how these societies should work. Part 6.3. Shitting on Company Time. In episode 3, there's a quick little scene between Thaddeus, a squire, and Maximus, another squire who's masquerading as a knight by staying in the power armor of his knight whom he let die in episode 2. Thaddeus talks about how he grew up working on a fly farm as a shitter.
Feed our shit to the flies, mulch them up, and sell it as protein. Anyway, that's why I'm so fat.
What in the goddamn?
I would like to introduce these writers to a little thing called the law of conservation of mass. In this case, the law applies thusly. However much material they feed Thaddeus, they can only get that much out in shit. Except, of course, our lad talks about being fat because of working as a shitter. So clearly a fair portion of whatever he was fed stopped with him. But okay, the rest becomes shit. The shit is eaten by maggots who become flies who are then mulched up and sold as protein. There cannot be more mass of the flies than there was of the food that went into the shit. This is a throwaway gag. The writers realized that many humans find feces funny and they ran with it. But let us consider every part of this statement and what it says about the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood obtains some unspecified food to be shat out, fed to flies who are then sold as protein. This has to be one of the most horrifically inefficient and gross ways to obtain food that I have ever heard of. Protein is, contrary to some popular beliefs, not only found in animals and animal products. Let me introduce the writers to beans. These have been, as I mentioned earlier, a staple of human civilization since the Stone Age. Many varieties are hardy and easy to grow, they fix nitrogen in the soil, thus making it easier to grow grain, and they're high in protein. And all they need is water, soil, and sunshine. And before someone protests that maybe beans went extinct, no, they didn't. They're a food item in Fallout New Vegas, which takes place only 15 years before this show. So in service of a joke, and I begrudge them the word because it wasn't very funny, they have established an element of world building that turns the Brotherhood into a bunch of coprophagic morons who, despite hoarding old world tech, don't understand beans. And they sell the fly paste? To whomst? Who is buying this literal shit? And what do they have to pay the Brotherhood with? Who is the Brotherhood trading with to any extent, and for what reason? The Brotherhood is the most powerful faction in the wasteland that we see. They seem to have no qualms about slaughtering the entire population of Griffith Observatory in order to take something they want, so why are they also 2-bit fly paste salesmen? Who would buy shit fly paste in a world where meat seems to be so widely available? Also of note, humans also know a good way to get food from shit. We use it as fertilizer. We've had this figured out for thousands of years. You don't feed flies with shit, you feed plants with it. From the Aztecs to the medieval Chinese, human shit has been taken out to the fields and mixed with animal manure in order to restore fertility and promote crop growth. I would argue that this basic agricultural knowledge is more useful than most of the technology we see the Brotherhood actually utilizing, but instead they feed people to shit, to feed flies, to feed to people. It's just the human centipede with more steps. This isn't a critical element of the show. It has nothing to do with the characters aside from giving Thaddeus something to be prattling about so that Maximus can interrupt him by asking about himself, because Maximus is an unpleasantly self-centered dingus. But it further degrades any sense of realism and depth. It reveals the writers are not thinking deeply about this world, trying to make it real, give it texture and depth and bones. They are just throwing literal shit at the wall to see what sticks. Part 6.4. Non-binary representation. In the Brotherhood, we are introduced to Maximus's best friend, Dane. Dane is portrayed by Zalia Mendez-Jones, a trans man, and referred to by they-them pronouns. This is a win for diversity. We're living, But this choice makes no damn sense. And before anyone gets after me, no, this choice doesn't suck because it's woke. It sucks because of all the groups to make woke in the post-apocalypse. The showrunners chose the theo-fascist militarists. Generally speaking, highly traditionalist military castes aren't usually the most welcoming places for they-themers. What's worse is this choice makes Dane's non-binary identity utterly unremarkable. I understand there are arguments for that non-binary people just simply exist and don't need to be set aside as different or strange in media, and that, again, would be fine in any other faction. But the Brotherhood in the games, despite some degree of gender parity in terms of their warriors, are depicted as being socially conservative. In Fallout New Vegas, which takes place 15 years before this, the character Veronica discusses how homophobia still endures with many people in the Brotherhood, which I found fascinating. It's justified by the desire of the Brotherhood to keep their population up and preserve their way of life, but of course the origins of this go back further, to American conservatism and all the way back to good old Roman patriarchy, seeing feminine or submissive behavior as inherently shameful. Again, we missed an opportunity to have a sociologically driven story and instead gesture vaguely towards what was considered politically correct and relevant in 2022, though given the nasty rightward turn in recent years, maybe they'll quietly write our non-binary theo-fascist out in Season 2. Part 6.5, The Knights Templar. In the original 2 Fallouts and Fallout New Vegas, i.e. the good Fallout games, the Brotherhood fails to retain the power they have in the first game because they fail to learn the lesson of the Teutonic Order, that you can't have a powerful and reclusive religious order for long without a state to support it. Here the difference between 2 insanely powerful religious orders in medieval Europe might be illustrative, the aforementioned Teutonic Knights and the Knights Templar. While the Teutonic Knights were busy slaughtering pagans and establishing their own large domains on the Baltic Sea, the Knights Templar rose from their origins as protectors of Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem to become one of the richest and most powerful organizations in medieval Europe, especially in France. They effectively served as the banking system of France. They owned estates and castles all across Europe, and in 1300 had much more wealth than the Teutonic Knights, who were focused in the much poorer Baltic Sea region. But, as Barbara Tuchman writes in her magisterial work, A Distant Mirror, The Calamitous 14th Century, not only their money, but their existence as a virtually autonomous enclave invited their destruction. In a pounce like a tiger's leap, Philip, King of France, sieged the temple in Paris and had every Templar arrested the same night. The date was Friday the 13th of October 1307 CE. This is, by the way, the origin of Friday the 13th being a bad luck day. This magnificent secretive order, which scorned the world around them to serve their own narrow purpose, was vulnerable because they never carved out their own established state that could defend itself as a nation. They ruled over no people who were subjects of the Knights Templar. Instead, they arrogantly lorded over France, and when France had the chance, she destroyed them. The Teutonic Knights, by contrast, who were also rich, powerful, and envied by secular rulers, carved out a state for themselves, and thus, to dispossess them, a king would need to launch a war, not merely cut off their castles in Germany. In fact, it took a war in the middle of the 15th century for Poland to finally bring them to heel, and vestiges of the order survived well into the 16th century in the forms of the Livonian Confederation and monastic Prussia. The order only ended when the last Grand Master converted to Protestantism and became the Duke of Prussia. Yet the Brotherhood, because of their isolationist tendencies, didn't bother to establish a state of the Brotherhood of Steel, and as a result were driven out of California by the NCR, and by the time of Fallout New Vegas are down to basically one base in Nevada. Part 6.6, When the Brotherhood are done right. Both this section and the next are heavily inspired by HBomberGuy's reviews of Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, which are excellent, and you should go watch them right now if you have any interest in this series. I'll include links in the description, and I promise it's not plagiarism if I'm admitting that he said it better than I can. Some members of the Brotherhood, like the companion character Veronica, who's the best character in Fallout New Vegas in my opinion, want to reform the by now ossified organization, to actually get out into the wasteland and engage with the people, to re-establish relevance by actually using their military might to do some real good. But there are old hardliners that insist on isolation and an adversarial relationship with the rest of the world. It's an interesting and fitting epilogue for the powerful Brotherhood we see in the first game. Societies, like organisms, must adapt to new conditions or go extinct, and the Brotherhood is facing extinction. As the main character of New Vegas, You can either help them adapt or destroy them utterly, but no matter what you do, the Brotherhood as it once was will be gone forever. Part 6.7. Todd Howard is a lazy storyteller. In Fallout the television show, the Brotherhood of Steel is the most powerful faction in the whole former United States. They exist to preserve and secure old world tech. They don't understand beans, and they eat flies fed on human shit. You might say that surely they eat something else, but the only thing we see or hear of them eating other than the fly paste is some identified rations, which may in fact be the fly paste. This change in the Fallout lore began under the dark reign of Todd Howard. Bethesda didn't want to try hard to make Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland distinct from the first two games, so they plugged in pre-established factions like the Enclave and the Brotherhood and made them insultingly simple. And in doing so, they decided the Brotherhood of Steel are actually still powerful and also the good guys. In both Fallout 3 and 4, the Brotherhood looms over the world as these sort of theo-fascist avenging angels, but also the goodies. Because they have the cool armor, and don't you want the cool armor? It's a Fallout game. That means power armor and the Brotherhood of Steel. This is the reason I never played Fallout 4, though I think I've read the entire wiki at this point, and why my interest in the series after New Vegas plummets generally. We've explored the ins and outs of the Brotherhood, and the game series has already given us a satisfactory and sociologically sound endpoint to them. They need to change or go extinct. They cannot remain as they were in the immediate aftermath of the Great War. Like the Teutonic Order, they must build up a government to preserve themselves, or like the Templars, be destroyed by the larger and more powerful societies, which will develop by using the land and resources of post-apocalyptic America more fully. This may be the biggest difference in the philosophy of the non-Todd Howard and the Todd Howard Fallout universes. The non-Todd universe changes and grows and develops according to the laws of history, whereas the Todd universe is stagnant. Todd Howard apparently said of show creator Jonathan Nolan, "It was very clear that he had played the games and loved them, and had a vision for what it could be on screen. We were really, really patient. Once we found that, it was very clear to us that this is the right way to bring Fallout to the screen." And as I learned from a New York Times article about the show, Nolan played the Todd universe games, not the non-Todd ones. He clearly had played a lot, Howard said, Fallout 3 especially. He could speak to it with authenticity and had a view of what made it tick. Fallout 3 was a game that you could play comfortably for 50 to 100 hours, Nolan said. And that is why this Fallout show was never going to be the Fallout show that I wanted. To Nolan's credit, this superficial mess is a faithful homage to Todd Howard's storytelling, which is a bit like a terrible pancake with some tasty chocolate chips, so much blah and uninspired batter, peppered with occasional flashes of brilliance and humor. Part 7. The War to Temporarily End All Wars. The very beginning of the Fallout TV show depicts the last moments of peace in the world. We see Cooper Howard, former film star though now seemingly come down in the world, at a children's birthday party with his adorable daughter. We catch a glimpse of this society, 1950s style, apparent prosperity, but there is an uneasiness to the whole scene. On the television, the weather presenter stops the forecast to say, "I can't do the weather if I don't even know if there's going to be a next week." And the hostess of the party turns the TV channel to a cartoon to try and ease tension. Like in 1950s America, the world teeters on the very edge of nuclear war.
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover.
This is an official civil defense film.
But unlike the 50s, where thanks to that old peacenik Nikita Khrushchev, the USSR didn't actually want to blow the USA off the face of the earth, in 2077, the bombs drop. From where is pretty unclear. We don't see a lone Chinese bomber way up in the sky or missiles arcing down, but that's okay. What we do see is eerie and beautiful, and we begin to see the microcosm of societal collapse. There's this shot of one of the guests at the party begging to come into the family's fallout shelter, and the father ends up punching him to get him away. It's not every man for himself, but every family for itself. Cooper rides off with his daughter on the back of a horse as more bombs fall. This is a really great scene. The acting is phenomenal. And though the physics of these atomic blasts are in fact underselling the horrors inflicted by hydrogen bombs, it's visually dramatic and sells the end of the world. The next time we see the pre-war world, in Episode 3, it's further back than that dark October day in 2077, but not by much. We see Cooper Howard in his heyday as a film actor, and we get a nod that the 2070s are like the 1950s in yet another way. Cooper is filming a Western, and the new pages of the script call for him to shoot an unarmed man lying on the ground. Cooper is uncomfortable with this and asks for Bob, presumably a screenwriter, but the director tells him, "Bob's been fired, Coop," because it turns out Bob's a bit of a communist. Now, this little exchange tells us a lot. The Red Scare, which tore Hollywood apart in the late 40s and into the 50s, is apparently alive and well. Communism is still a firing offense. No real surprises here, but, and this is important, unlike almost everything that happens after the apocalypse in the timeline of the show, this both tells us key information about this world and makes sense. Part 7.2. Why this makes sense. I have a theory as to why, in general, the pre-war stuff in the show makes the most sense and feels real. It's because the writers didn't have to invent a society out of whole cloth, nor even try to understand a society written by other, better writers for Fallouts 1, 2, and New Vegas. They were able to just slap a veneer of 50s style and some McCarthyism over what is essentially modern America. Because all the mechanics of the world are just simply the mechanics of our world, give or take a few technological innovations, they don't have to do the nuts and bolts world building that seems to be such a challenge for them, and instead rely on our shared cultural context to make this world feel real. And it does. The pre-war world feels really real. Well, almost. Part 7.3. Where art thou, China? One thing that the original game sold really well was 50s-style paranoia and xenophobia. As a consequence of this decade-long war with China, racist propaganda proliferates in the Fallout universe, and China is very clearly the enemy. Mentioned in Fallout 3 is Executive Order 99066, which results in the internment of Chinese and Chinese Americans in the United States, some of whom end up being subjected to horrific medical experiments at Big MT, a research facility in Nevada. Yet the word China is not said once in the Fallout television show. At first I thought it was odd. Reds are mentioned, as are commies, but there's no mention nor even indirect depiction of the opposing superpower which along with America destroyed the world in 2077, the People's Republic of China. I kept expecting that someone, at some point, would say the damn word, but when I finished all 8 episodes of Season 1, I had the realization that not once in all these hours of screen time does any character utter China, not even to refer to porcelain. This is weird, right? I feel like this is a missed opportunity, especially given our current geopolitical reality. In 2020, there was a little spot of trouble that you'll probably remember, which worsened Sino-American relations and led to a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes in the United States.
Growing concern about a new and rare pneumonia-like virus that has caused at least 2 deaths and has spread from China to other countries in Asia. And federal health officials don't want it to spread here.
Even in our world, where China has not attacked the United States and in fact frequently professes its desire to work with the US to de-escalate global tensions, a large portion of the American public are to some extent Sinophobic. According to a 2020 Pew Research survey, 73% of US adults say that they have an unfavorable view of the country, China, up 26 percentage points since 2018. And in 2020 alone, there was a 339% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans, mainly due to perceived Chinese identity and American rage over the pandemic. Sinophobia has a long and poisonous history in the United States. It remains the most acceptable form of racial bigotry due to Asian Americans, and particularly Chinese Americans, being viewed as a successful minority and thus fair targets for shitty jokes, slurs, and worse forms of hate. Anecdotally, in my childhood in the 2000s in Utah, anti-Asian racism was the most casually accepted form of racism I knew about. Even some of my otherwise liberal relatives would make broad generalizations about Asians, repeating bad jokes that relied heavily on accent humor, So why, in a show about nuclear war, about the failure of countries to settle their differences through peaceful means, a show that takes such a cynical view of how hateful and violent humanity is, are they suddenly so circumspect about who America's adversary is? My guess is that they were scared of saying anything of real substance. If you lean into the world of the games, if you show Chinese-American internment and the xenophobia which canonically swept the pre-war United States in the Fallout universe, you will unavoidably say something about the xenophobia and Cold War II of our present day. And there is nothing you can say about present-day geopolitical tensions which will not ignite controversy, so Amazon decides to sidestep it and just say Reds and Far East and hope people don't notice. This, like so many other decisions, is the easy decision, and like so many other choices in the show, it makes the world less interesting and less real. It doesn't attempt to understand or expand on the resource wars of Fallout's 2070s, and because it doesn't do that, it doesn't understand our ongoing Cold War II. Part 7.4. How to Understand Cold War II. To understand the current geopolitical situation and the geopolitical situation of 2077, as postulated by the Fallout video games, you have to understand China. China is one of the world's oldest civilizations. When Rome was still a collection of mud hut villages on the 7 hills beside the Tiber, the Zhou dynasty ruled over millions of people in northern China and laid the framework for Chinese imperial government that would survive through multiple dynastic cycles all the way to the 20th century. The Chinese people are a remarkable and resilient nation who have added so much to the heritage of humanity, from the music and poetry of the Tang dynasty to more prosaic things like gunpowder, silk, compasses, printing, paper, blast furnaces, and the toothbrush, to name a few. China is also a frequently misunderstood civilization, often cloaked in vague Orientalisms and fears about a yellow peril. It's befitting that we don't know much about China in the Fallout universe, because America and especially American politicians have always had a hard time understanding China on Chinese terms. Now, I am not Chinese, nor any kind of great expert on China, but I am an enthusiastic student of Chinese history and of international geopolitics, so I hope my perspective here is a valuable one. The Chinese people are justifiably proud of their civilization. They can look back on 3,000 years of written history, and unlike the other cradles of civilization, such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus River Valley, modern China is a direct linguistic and cultural descendant of the first people to master agriculture in the region. No external power has ever been able to subjugate China and fundamentally change her character. Mongols and Manchus alike had to transform themselves into Chinese dynasties in order to rule her. China's languages are still primarily Sinitic, and have been thus to the beginnings of recorded history in that part of the world, whereas Sumerian and ancient Egyptian went extinct thousands of years ago, and the language of the Indus River Valley civilization has been completely lost to history. From 1000 BCE up until 1850 CE, almost 3,000 years, China was, with rare and short periods excepted, the most populous empire in the world. And in the last millennium, until the 1800s, China was always the most powerful nation in Asia, only occasionally rivaled by India. And as I mentioned, the foreign Mongols and Manchus had to become the Yuan and Qing dynasties respectively, and to move their capitals to Beijing to govern her. China's very name in her own tongue is Zhongguo, middle country, implying that China is the very center of the world. But by the 1830s, China had become the victim of European imperialism. The British East India Company began pushing opium into China, precipitating an opioid crisis that makes modern America's opioid crisis look rather small by comparison. The Qing dynasty tried to put a stop to this trade, and Britain declared war on China and forced them to allow the trade to continue, twice. Throughout the 19th century, China's position in the world declined still further. The Taiping Rebellion tore through China's heartland from 1850 to 1864, killing tens of millions of people and further weakening the country. In the latter half of the 19th century, European powers forced concessions from a now enfeebled China, seizing their ports, building railways across Chinese territory, and generally treating China like a colony in the making. This image from a French satirical magazine shows, in a very racist way, how European powers at the end of the 19th century were planning to cut up China. The caption reads, "China, the cake of kings and emperors." Note that only France and her then ally Russia are portrayed as normal humans, whereas England, Germany, Japan, and China are all racist caricatures. For a country which had long expected relations with foreign powers to be one of tributaries to the great Middle Kingdom, this was all deeply humiliating. For the Chinese people, their own imperial government, run as it was by ethnic Manchus, was seen more and more as an alien government of barbarians who had lost the mandate of heaven, a Chinese sociopolitical concept which ties the well-being of the nation with the legitimacy of the ruling dynasty. In the 1911 Xinhai Revolution, Chinese nationalists and republicans overthrew the child emperor Puyi, ending the Qing dynasty and nearly 3,000 years of imperial rule. But the century of humiliation which had begun in the mid-1800s was only a little more than half over. China fell into civil war as local warlords seized provinces and Japan encroached on northeastern China, and foreigners took even greater control of China's trade. Starting in 1927, the Chinese Communist Party worked to take control of China, defeating warlords, and they vowed to liberate the country from foreign imperialism and the peasantry from their oppressive landlords. More than 20 years of civil war followed, breaking only from 1937 to 1945, when the nationalists and communists set aside their differences to fight the Japanese invaders. After the end of World War II, there was a brief moment when nationalists and communists came together for the 10-10 Accord, which laid out a path to establishing a coalition government and a new democratic system for China. The agreement, however, fell apart, and more brutal civil war followed, culminating in the communists driving the nationalists off of mainland China to Taiwan and the establishment of the People's Republic of China on October 1st, 1949. On that day, Mao Zedong is said to have announced from Tiananmen Gate, "The People's Republic of China is born. The Chinese people have stood up." Though there are debates as to if this was actually said. And this phrase has become emblematic for modern China of what the People's Republic means, and why there are so many Chinese who are fiercely proud of their government despite its autocratic and totalitarian tendencies. A century of humiliation ended when the communists took control of China, and under the Communist Party, China has stood up from that humiliation at the hands of foreign powers and reascended to be one of the world's great powers. The only power, in fact, which currently can even hope to challenge the United States' hegemony in the world. If you don't understand what this means to the Chinese, and especially to Chinese politicians, you can't understand China. I think American policymakers and pundits often view some of China's more aggressive stances through the lens of Germany before World War II, and cast attempts to engage with China in the mold of British appeasement of Germany in the 1930s. But the motives of 1930s Germany are not those of China. China doesn't want or need Lebensraum, and they are not prepared nor preparing for great aggressive wars of conquest. China lays outlandish claims to the South China Sea and insists on Taiwan being internationally recognized as part of one indivisible China because to the Communist Party, to Chinese nationalists, any severing of Chinese territory, any diminishment of China's status, harkens back to the dark days of the century of humiliation. Taiwan, to Chinese policymakers, is an open wound from that time that will not heal. To draw an analogy, imagine Florida split off from America in the 1940s, went communist, and was given weapons by the People's Republic of China. Can you imagine how Americans would react to that? How furious right-wingers and nationalists would be anytime China talked about defending Florida from American aggression?
Communist piece of trash!
Now, this isn't a perfect analogy by any means. I recognize the right of the people of Taiwan to democratic self-determination, and I do not think they should be a part of China if they don't want to be a part of China. But I am trying to get you to understand how the Chinese government views the issue. I am trying to help you understand that China isn't some irrational baddie, but a country that is still processing a century of trauma and acting out because of it. And America, rather than taking the understanding view and operating in a framework designed to soothe China's frazzled ego while also protecting our allies in the region, takes the attitude of let's poke the dragon and ratchets up tensions with trade wars, tirades in Congress, and accusing Singaporean executives of being Chinese communists.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
I think the Fallout TV series, and the video games for that matter, miss many opportunities to try and understand the Chinese people and their government. 98 million people in China are members of the Communist Party. Many more have a broadly positive view of the achievements of the Communist Party. According to USC Dornsife, even when surveyed anonymously, the approval rating of the Communist Party is between 50 to 70% among Chinese citizens. For reference, at time of recording, the Republican Party has a 41% approval rating, and the Democrats a dismal 34%. The approval ratings of America's two parties together is comparable to that of the higher estimate of the Communist Party's popularity. Even among those who disapprove of the party, not all are pro-capitalist and pro-liberal democracy. A sizable minority of Chinese people believe that the party has drifted too far right and expressed desires to return to the severe equality of the Maoist period. Understanding the Chinese Communist Party not as an evil monolith, but as an organization with its corruptions, idiosyncrasies, and yes, even its good sides, is important to try to understand China. So why do we need to understand China? Because they have the bomb, we have the bomb, and we are two great nations and civilizations who could make the world better or worse depending on how we choose to move forward. Because the People's Republic of China deserves to be treated with respect, to be recognized for its accomplishments even as we ask it to do better. The PRC's treatment of the Tibetans and Uyghurs is reprehensible. But if we in America want to help them, we need to separate our genuinely progressive desires to end human rights abuses everywhere from the cynical Cold War mindset of undermining and destroying the Red Menace. We can advocate for the Chinese government to respect the autonomous status granted to these regions in the 1950s and to end practices of forced labor and kangaroo courts. If we want to make a stronger case for Chinese dissidents, we can do it better if we promote the benefits of a healthy civil society within the communist system, rather than seeing it as a wedge to destabilize and destroy communism in China. If we begin to treat China with respect, if we take China at her word, when we can then begin to hold China accountable, not to our framework, which she will always view as an imperialist imposition, but to China's own people, her own laws, and her own traditions. The People's Republic should belong to the people, and if we are prepared to work with the Chinese people, not against them, the Communist Party would have no choice but to change to better serve them or to face the dustbin of history. But we can't do that so long as xenophobia drives our decision-making, so long as the Communist Party can truthfully say to Chinese people that America is hostile not just to communism, but to Chinese civilization. If China was a democracy making similar decisions regarding Taiwan, the South China Sea, if they still had a massive economy and were not aligned with the United States, do you think we would treat them any better? That American policymakers would be any more sympathetic to or knowledgeable of the history of that great land and the national traumas they are still processing? I don't think so, because this isn't about socialism with Chinese characteristics. It's about fear of the other. It's about America's reluctance to accept the laws of history, to realize no hegemony nor empire lasts forever, and to prepare for that reality. It's about American politicians needing an external enemy to blame for their own failure, because it's always easier to demonize an outsider for your country's faults, rather than to own up to the failures of policies you enacted, either in good faith or as a result of corruption and incompetence. So we demonize China, but when we demonize China, lumping 1.4 billion people in with the most odious decisions of their current leadership, when we ostracize our fellow citizens because of their shared ethnicity with those we have decided are the enemy, we put the world at risk of a future that looks, in some respects, like Fallout's America of 2077, and thus a future that looks kind of like Fallout's 2296. I can't stop imagining a better version of the Fallout TV series that actually tackles the xenophobia which festers alongside patriotism during wartime, that shows the human cost of making a monolith out of those you perceive as your enemy. The show might have also illustrated how hate and paranoia drive more reckless and aggressive policy decisions that cause more trouble, leading to more hate and paranoia, spiraling downwards until mushroom clouds are sprouting up over Los Angeles. This could be a poignant warning to us now that even though we can oppose the immoral actions of China and stand up for our allies, we shouldn't recklessly challenge China just to challenge China, and we shouldn't make our policy decisions based off of hate and fear. But instead, the show won't even say the word China, because it would mean reckoning with a controversial topic, and these showrunners are too chicken shit for that. Part 7.5 Winning Capitalism. In the final episode of Season 1, we get a few big reveals to some dumb mysteries that I no longer cared about by the time we got around to solving them. The whole season long, there was a question as to what's in Vault 31. How spooky! All the people in Vault 32 died or killed each other when they found out for some reason. But what is in Vault 31? A bunch of frozen middle managers from before the war, and a Roomba with a brain. I do not care. The big dumb reveal that really sticks in my craw. The insult that drove me to write this whole goddamn essay when I have never before done anything like this in my life is that Volt Tech started the Great War to ensure its profitability. In order to win capitalism, Volt Tech executives and the executives of some of the mega corporations you'd be familiar with from the games gather in a room obviously modeled on the war room from Dr. Strangelove, and decide to trigger nuclear war so that eventually they, and they alone, can reclaim the uninhabited surface. This is why Lucy's father blew up the NCR in the 2280s, to make sure civilization doesn't restart unless these chuckle fucks sanction it. The practicality of this plan, the fact that people likely survived all over the world, the possibility that new empires and republics and even communist states might be springing up in Eurasia, Africa, and South America is not mentioned, nor was it even thought of. Instead of the nuclear war being the inevitable consequence of societies motivated by hate and greed, the result of suicidal little madmen pressing an electronic button, it becomes the calculated action of a cabal with malice aforethought, a group of people who actively want to end the world. But this is not how the world will end. Part 7.6 Stanislav Petrov. This is Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Yevgrafovich Petrov. He was an officer in the Soviet Air Force in the early 1980s. Every human alive owes this man an enormous debt of gratitude. He was in command of a Soviet missile base in 1983 when Oko, the Soviet early warning system akin to America's NORAD, reported 5 incoming ICBMs from America. Comrade Petrov had his orders. Missiles were flying towards Moscow. He was supposed to launch a retaliatory strike to answer America's attack with Soviet missiles. But something seemed off to Comrade Petrov. Why would the Americans launch so few missiles? All his training told him that if the USA and the USSR were to go to war, the USA would launch hundreds of ICBMs, attempting to turn every city and military base in the Soviet Union to radioactive dust. So Comrade Petrov waited for 5 agonizing minutes, at which point ground radar would confirm whether or not the US had really launched an attack. And of course, as we know, they hadn't. Comrade Petrov had the world in his hands that September night. If he had given the orders to launch at a time of such high tension, the Soviet Union had accidentally shot down a Korean Airlines flight only weeks before, ratcheting tensions between the Soviet bloc and the West to a very high level, the likely result would have been a series of retaliatory strikes culminating in a full-scale nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. The world we see in Fallout, scarred and ruined, could be that of the present day, if not for this one man who decided he wouldn't end the world. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017, unsung in Russia given that he was an officer who disobeyed military protocol and revealed embarrassing bugs in the early warning system that made the Soviet high command look bad. Yet he deserves to be remembered and praised, because he could have been a suicidal little madman when he had his finger on the button, but he wasn't. He was a good man who kept his head in an absolutely terrifying situation that would have had many people pressing the button. I tell you this story to point to why the Fallout television show made me so angry when it told us the bomb was dropped as part of a deliberate plot by an evil megacorporation, when it gave away the mystery the games had kept as to who dropped the first bomb. I tell you this story to try and scare you to your bones, to get you involved to demand that our leaders keep us away from the precipice where this kind of thing can happen, to work for peace, so that no one man's finger is all that stands between this messy world of ours that could still be salvaged and a world of indescribable horror, hunger, and death. On October 23rd, 2077, the bombs fell all across the world. We were never meant to know, as far as I'm concerned, who dropped the first one. On that day, there was no Stanislav Petrov to save the billions of people who needed him. Panic, fear, and hate sent the world spiraling into apocalypse. It was not some deliberate plot, not the result of a careful strategy, but instead the inevitable result of recklessness, greed, and war in our atomic age.
War. War never changes.
The essence of war may always remain the same. But I began this essay with that quote from William L. Shirer for a reason. Because if Russia and the US go to war, if China and the US go to war, there truly can be no winning. Whatever comes after won't be what we went to war to defend or obtain. The lesson Fallout was meant to teach is this: there's no recovering from the bombs. Not really. In a way, the comparison I drew to Rome earlier doesn't apply, because the fall of Rome didn't cause mass extinctions or destroy civilized life altogether. The fall of America and China in nuclear war and Fallout damn near did. And maybe will. October 23rd, 2077 is not nearly as far away as it was when I first became aware of the Fallout series almost 20 years ago. I will be old, but I have a good chance of still being alive if I take good care of myself. And on that day, I hope to see the sunrise and the sunset in a world at peace. Fallout should be a cautionary tale, and if this television show was ever going to be that, it had to have the courage to be real. It had to take the time to think deeply about the story it told and the world it portrayed, and it didn't. It missed this golden opportunity to use such a rich world filled with great lore to hold a mirror up to our own time and place. Like other big dumb shows, such as Amazon's Ring of Power and Netflix's live-action remake of Avatar: The Last Airbender, it took amazing source material and turned it into a box to shove references into. Rather than going in deeper to the fantastic and interesting worlds of their source materials, these shows took those complex worlds and made them feel shallow and unreal. Lord of the Rings, whether in Tolkien's books or in the Peter Jackson film trilogy, will stand the test of time, whereas Rings of Power will fade. The animated Avatar will still be loved long after the live-action version is forgotten. But I worry about the future of Fallout as a series. The non-Todd games which gave this series its cachet may be forgotten when set against this big dumb show that will be seen by more people than will ever play the games, and I think that's a damn shame. If you liked the first season of the Fallout TV series and kept watching all this way, thank you. It means a lot to me that you were willing to hear me out. And I want to tell you, you're not wrong for liking the show. It has a lot of funny and interesting dialogue, some of the effects are fantastic, and there are flashes of brilliance amidst the shallowness and unreality. But in order for this show to have been great, for the show to be what I think it could have been and should have been, the showrunners needed to give the undergirding of reality to all the fantastic elements of Fallout. Keep the undying ghouls and the fingerloddles and organ-harvesting robots and Jim's limbs, but make the world they exist in feel real. In order for me to enjoy the fantastic, I must also see the realistic. Conclusion. The very last shot of Season 1 of the Fallout show is of Hank McClane wearing Brotherhood armor looking at the city of New Vegas. This is a perfect shot, but not because it is good. It is precisely the opposite. New Vegas appears to be completely isolated in an otherwise featureless valley. It looks less real than the New Vegas of the video game that came out in 2010. And this is emblematic of why the show failed utterly to be anything like it should have been. This New Vegas is a set piece copy-pasted onto a screensaver. It has no depth and no clear reason to be the place that Hank is going to. It's simply a thing fans of the series are supposed to recognize with no thought or love put into it. Nolan and the writers of the Fallout show may be much more talented than they seem from the end product. I don't know how much Amazon's executives screwed up what might have been a great project by meddling with the creatives until the show was dumbed down enough to be deemed widely marketable. But what I do know is that this show doesn't know what makes the Fallout series great. The good Fallout games show humanity's endurance, how even in the hellish wastes, even in conditions that bring out the worst in humanity, the best of humanity also endures. They build believable societies and show them adapting or failing to adapt to the forward march of history. Those 3 games say so much about how human societies work, serving as a kind of sociological petri dish for you, the player, to modify as you like. They also serve as a warning, and a warning which sticks with me. They're a warning against Cold War paranoia and xenophobia, a warning against megacorporations and unaccountable governments. So as we go headlong into Cold War II, with our adversary the same one as depicted in the Fallout series, more than ever we need stories that caution us as to where this kind of cold conflict can lead, how societies move to that point, and what happens after. We need stories that illuminate just how close the world came to annihilation in Cold War I. We need to remember Stanislav Petrov. The Fallout TV series might have been the Doctor Strangelove of our generation. Clearly they are aware of that earlier masterpiece of comedy and caution. But in order to do that, they would have had to think about why people do what they do, why societies work the way they do, and why societies actually collapse. And that, apparently, was too much to ask. Thank you.
I always like to end on a positive note, so here is a rousing, uplifting song which is guaranteed to cheer you up. When you attend a funeral, it is sad to think that sooner or later those you love will do the same for you. And you may have thought it tragic, not to mention other adjectives, to think of all the weeping they will do. But don't you worry, no more ashes, no more sackcloth, and an armband made of black cloth will someday never more adorn a sleeve. For if the bomb that drops on you gets your friends and neighbors too, there'll be nobody left behind to grieve, and we will all go together when we go. What a comforting fact that is to know. Universal bereavement, an inspiring achievement. Yes, we all will go together when we go. We will all go together when we go. All suffused with an incandescent glow. No one will have the endurance to collect on his insurance. Lloyds of London will be loaded when they go. We will all fry together when we fry. We'll be French fried potatoes by and by. There will be no more misery when the world is our rotisserie. Yes, we all will fry together when we fry. We will all bake together when we bake. There'll be nobody present at the wake. With complete participation in that grand incineration, nearly 3 billion hunks of well-done steak. We will all char together when when we char. And let there be no moaning of the bar. Just sing out a Te Deum when you see that ICBM, and the party will be come as you are. We will all burn together when we burn. There'll be no need to stand and wait your turn. When it's time for the fallout and St. Peter calls us all